Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining this Labor for Palestine Canada interview with David Adler from Progressive International. My name is Pamela Arancibia, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Greater Toronto Area chapter of Labor for Palestine, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I did want to run through some logistics. Please note that the chat between participants has been disabled for this event, and we are inviting folks to use the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen to pose questions you have for David. You can feel free to post your questions and comments at any time there. We are also live streaming on Instagram. Please note that the questions that we are answering are from the Zoom webinar. Unfortunately, we will not be pulling the questions from Instagram itself, but you are welcome to leave your comments and expressions of solidarity. With that, I would like to introduce David. David is a political economist and general coordinator of the Progressive International. Previously, David served on the foreign policy advisory team for U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders and directed policy for Yanis Varoufakis and the Democracy in Europe movement, DIEM25. He was a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, a Policy Leader Fellow at the European University Institute, and a Fulbright Scholar at the Colegio de México in Mexico City. So with that, we will turn to this interview with David. Thank you, David, for joining us from the flotilla. I guess maybe what we wanted to start with, I think many of the folks joining us today are familiar with the flotilla. They know that this is happening, that there are people traveling from around the world to break the siege. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history of the flotilla for folks who are just starting to learn about it or have only heard about it recently.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you all here this I guess, Sunday morning, afternoon, wherever you may find yourself here. As you can see, the sun is beginning to set on the Mediterranean. I think it's so important, the conversation that we're having, because I think it's so important, the role and the place of labor in the struggle for Palestinian liberation and in the protection of our lives and of the humanitarian mission that we've embarked on now for several weeks. I think to start as an overview of this mission, of what's called the Global Sumud Flotilla, which is the combination of several different initiatives, and we'll get to that a bit later. It's helpful, as you were saying, Pamela, to give a bit of a background. To do that, it's very important to remember that the siege of Gaza did not start 2 years ago. And the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which was originally built to break that siege, also wasn't founded 2 years ago. But since 2005, when the so-called occupation of Gaza had been very contested arguments. People like Francesca Albanese, operating out of the Special Rapporteur's office, would argue that that occupation never ended. But what was certain, what's uncontested, what's undeniable, is that since at least 2005, Israel has controlled every aspect of what goes in and out of Gaza, whether that's agricultural, products, some of the most fertile land in the world in Gaza. Now, of course, we're down to 1.5% of arable land that's now able to produce agriculture because of the destruction of these territories, whether that's pharmaceuticals, whether that's food and water. These things are controlled not by Gazans, not by the Palestinian Authority, but by the State of Israel itself. That is an illegal siege under any interpretation of international law. And the Freedom Flotilla Coalition was founded as a civil social response to that cruel and illegal blockade of Gaza that serves to isolate and arguably imprison its residents, to deliver critical humanitarian aid, to deliver goods to its people. And so I believe the first flotilla, as it became known, traveled to Gaza in 2008. Since then, many boats have traveled. Very, very few have made it. And some have suffered tremendous violence. Most famously in 2010, many of your viewers, listeners, and allies will remember when the Marmara was intercepted very violently, and it was a fleet that was set off from Turkey to break the siege. 9 people were assassinated by the Israeli army on one of these boats, and that has not deterred the initiative from continuing to set sail, continuing to seek to break the siege. Already this year, we've seen not one, not two, but 3 missions set off on individual boats. Conference, which was drones struck off the coast of Malta in a very terrifying attack on Palestinian solidarity and was never able to sail. The Madlin, which was intercepted and had its people imprisoned, and the Handala that suffered the same fate. They were not able to reach Gaza. In the months since, we've seen the movement of solidarity with Palestine just explode, just, grow by factors, by orders of magnitude. And many initiatives come together around the original nucleus of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. So we saw the March to Gaza, where people from all across the world came to Egypt to try to march to the Rafah crossing, again, in a gesture of humanitarian support to try to break this siege from the Rafah side, from the Egyptian side. We saw the Sumud convoy. These were trucks moving across North Africa with a similar intention to deliver humanitarian aid against the efforts by the Israeli Defense Forces to prevent its entry. None of them successful. And so all of these initiatives have now come together in what is called now the Global Sumud Flotilla, which is the combination of these efforts in a single initiative that unites not just 1 boat, not 5 boats, not 10 boats, but I can look around me sailing across the Mediterranean and see 40 boats carrying hundreds of activists from over 44 countries, organized in national delegations and across totally different professions. We have journalists sailing to raise awareness, not just about the flotilla, but about the fate of journalists targeted and assassinated by the state of Israel. We have doctors and medics who are sailing in defense of their profession and their colleagues who are every day suffering from fuel shortages, medicine shortages, that they try to provide for children and amputees and pregnant women who are suffering the consequences of a heightened and accelerated and intensified siege over the past 2 years. And we have, of course, representatives. I'm here in the lead vessel of the whole flotilla, which is called the Family Boat, where the steering committee is based, and where we have, deputies and representatives, as well as the core kind of commando that helps to oversee logistics for the whole flotilla. We'll get into this a bit, I'm sure, Pamela. It's been a difficult journey so far, but people are true to the name Sumud, which means steadfast. People are very determined to continue on with this journey, and not naive about its prospects. I mean, we're not stupid, and we know that it's going to be very difficult to reach Gaza, to reach the shores of Gaza with this aid. The mission's goal is very simple and it's very urgent and it's very clear. It's to establish a humanitarian corridor that doesn't run through Rafah and isn't controlled by the state of Israel, so that the states can resume their good faith obligations under international law to send much bigger boats with all of their resources and all of the money they're supposedly contributing to humanitarian aid. Every day we hear these numbers. Oh, the government of Ireland is contributing 35 million euros more to this effort. Okay, where's that money going? We think it should be going into boats that should be sailing alongside of us, so that when we do, like as a tip of a spear, break the siege and establish that corridor, they can accompany us with much bigger boats to make sure that a new corridor is open and available to the people of Gaza to receive the critical supplies that they desperately need after the UN, of course, declared a famine that, of course, disappeared from headlines almost immediately. I'm sure it's just true in Canada as it is across the world. And we think it's our responsibility as peoples of the world, as citizens, to refuse to let that headline disappear and do what must be done if states won't assume those good faith obligations, obligations that they themselves voted for in the UN resolution at the General Assembly 1 year ago on September 18th, 2024. I digress. But if it won't be the states of the world that will do this, it will be the peoples. And that's why I feel very honored and inspired by the people who are here and very happy to be speaking to you all on behalf of the flotilla, mostly because we know that this is just one instrument among many. And in fact, labor is a much more powerful instrument than any collection of people on the high seas. We'll get into that a bit, about what we're seeing emerging in the trade union movement around the world in solidarity with, of course, the participants of this flotilla, but more importantly, with mothers, fathers, and children suffering hour by hour, day by day in this new incursion in Gaza City. And so that's a bit of the background, I think, that gives us the strength and the coordination to make this huge logistical operation work. As you can imagine, we're on secondhand boats purchased with donations. It's crazy. But we know that something has to be done. It's important to put bodies on the line, and we know that someone has to draw a line in history and say, where were you during the greatest assault on fundamental humanitarian law of the 21st century? Well, we want to say that we were on the front line of the fight to recover it from ruin.
No, absolutely. No, thank you for that. That's helpful, I think, to contextualize everything and for folks to understand how we've gotten to where we are today in terms of this particular initiative. I think one of the things that was striking and perhaps seems different from past attempts is, you said earlier, like there's a huge role to be played by workers, especially unionized workers, who have that organization and militancy and ability to take action. Obviously, I think one of the most famous examples that's on the mind of folks who are following the flotilla right now is the Genoese dock workers who have threatened to shut down all of Europe, not just, shut things down locally, but, what impact do you think that is having on the flotilla right now and its ability to, you know, um, advance more or succeed more where past attempts have failed, or not had that support? Like, do you see that the participation of dock workers as being in coordination and contributing to the flotilla's work?
Absolutely. I mean, from the Progressive International, which is this global coalition of parties and movements and trade unions that I coordinate, we've been working on the labor question for a long time, particularly a campaign that we've called No Harbor for Genocide. So we've been working with trade unions of dock workers in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Spain, in Italy, all along the Mediterranean that we're now traversing to refuse to load and unload hazardous material, just as we've been coordinating with states through the Hague Group, which is a block of states that we've helped to bring together to take concrete action on this question of port coordination, refusing to basically, be party to this genocide. I think it's very important that we think about the legal aspects of this, and even as it relates to labor. The UN last week, as many of you will have seen, yet again has its leading experts and the Commission of Inquiry on Palestine come out and declare a genocide. This is not just a word. It's not just a description of what's happening. Under the Genocide Convention, there are very, very clear responsibilities that corresponds to a declaration of a genocide. And if you do not comply with those articles of the Genocide Convention, you are party to that genocide. Now, Canada risks being, shouldn't say risks, is presently party to that genocide. I understand that today we're celebrating the fact that Mark Carney is recognizing in the state of Palestine. It's so far away from the reality that people are suffering hour by hour and day to day, not just in Gaza, but in the occupied territories, that it almost reeks of a farce, to say that this is some grand historic gesture. What we really need is, as these Genoese workers are doing, to realize the power that's in their hands. I think it's very easy for people to fall into a trap of impotence and desolation and desperation and depression, looking at these images, scrolling through them every day. The fact is that there are so many examples of international solidarity as expressed through the trade union movement. Pinochet's Chile and the Rolls-Royce factories in the UK is just one that comes to mind. There's so many others about how how workers are in a world in which the social fabric has been so shredded by decades of privatization, liberalization, et cetera, but still workers hold the power to halt the global economy and make demands on behalf of all of humanity. So we felt very supported by the Genovese workers. They're not alone. I'm coordinating now with the International Transport Federation. I'm coordinating now with a lot of the GUFs, the ITUC and Uni Global, a lot of these other global union confederations to try to build a more serious trade union accompaniment to this flotilla. We obviously wish we didn't have to be here. I mean, it's been a long time at sea. It's been a difficult journey. And if the world were a saner place and a more legally bound place, this would be unthinkable because all these countries are party to the UN Arms Trades Treaty, and none of them should be trading or giving diplomatic support to cover, I should say, to a genocide. But in the absence of that, we have to find ways and instruments to take matters into our own hands. And what I usually say on calls like this is like, you can march in the streets. The social media really matters. Everything counts, and we know it counts because we're seeing some pressure really yield fruit. I know that I was belittling the gesture of some of these governments and recognizing the state of Palestine as being somewhat ceremonial, but what it does reflect is that social mobilization is working, that people are really moving the needle and changing the paradigm on people's relationship to Palestine. But the only thing that will really work is cutting the actual veins of complicity with this genocide, and only labor can do that. I mean, I work with a lot of parliamentarians, and pushing legislation towards arms embargo is very important. Trying to change, energy exports, and working with ministries as we've done in Colombia, for example, to end coal exports from Colombia to Israel. All that's very important, but it starts with the workers, and whether those are workers in tech companies like Google, who are offering sponsored ad space to the state of Israel to claim that we're harboring terror on this flotilla, that we're a Hamas flotilla, putting our lives at risk, or whether that's a factory work related or unrelated to the production of hazardous material or weapons manufacturing for Israeli firms, or for firms that on which Israel relies to fuel this assault on Gaza, is kind of irrelevant. The point is that we have the material power to make that is the kind of raw energy for a global resistance movement to the horrors that we're witnessing every day. So that I think, it's a big emphasis for a lot of us on this boat, is how can we make the most of this initiative? How can we make the most of our time on this boat as a lightning rod for bigger mobilizations on land, for more serious trade union activity, more militant trade union activity, to realize the power that resides in organized labor to change government policy and to change them.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. And you mentioned earlier sort of how what we're seeing on this flotilla is the counterparts of Palestinian workers, and especially those sectors that we're seeing most impacted participating. So, as you said, healthcare workers, doctors, surgeons, nurses whose entire vocation is, the preservation of life, seeing the healthcare infrastructure absolutely destroyed in Gaza as a way to eliminate the people and prevent their survival. We're talking about, journalists who are joining, including, for example, here locally from Toronto, our very own Camila with I think Press TV or whatnot. And so, and highlighting the role, going as, like you said, to document, but also as a as representatives of their, callings or workplaces or sectors, and shedding light on, the slaughter of journalists in Palestine and now Yemen as well. Um, and so on, educators who are, whose role is to educate our children, our young people, prepare people for work here, seeing their counterparts in Palestine have that education system destroyed, etc. And so it looks like this is because it's like a microcosm of international worker solidarity on this flotilla of workers going and representing their own groups of workers. I'm just wondering, to have all these different sectors and people from all around the world come to join, how can we use this as an opportunity? And the reason I'm thinking about this, especially, I think many of us in the labor movement have been thinking about it throughout, but I just saw a tweet by the journalist Richard Medhurst a couple of days ago, where he's talking about how is it 2 years into a genocide and we've not seen a single general strike around the world in support of Palestine. And it seems to me like, what are the opportunities to mobilize towards an international general strike, um, led by these workers who are putting their lives on the line and going in person to put this calling into action?
Yeah, I mean, here we get to this sort of depressing part of the initiative. It is a shame that it may require non-Palestinians, and it may require Canadians or Europeans or Latin Americans. It may require other countries' citizens to put their lives on the line or be detained and tortured and incarcerated by Israel to spur a more serious action. it should not require that. In the name of humanity, in the name of fundamental principles of decency, of human rights, it should not require, the bridge characters, as we might borrow a phrase from journalism, of these flotilla participants. It should be sufficient to understand that what's happening in Palestine is a premonition of what could happen anywhere around the world. That if we let Gaza die, all of humanity is at risk because the system of international law, weak, colonial, and sort of impotent as it feels at times, is the minimal thread that still connects us all in some kind of international community, right? And what Israel's doing is basically not just throwing a giant middle finger at the system of international law, but winking to its allies and indeed its adversaries to say, well, if we can do it, you can do the same. And that's extremely, I don't need to explain why that's so dangerous and to whom it gives license to do unspeakable things, even those countries who call themselves democracies. So when we were in Tunisia, when the Spanish fleet met up with the so-called Maghreb fleet, the Tunisian fleet that was based there, two successive nights, there were drone attacks on our fleet. So on the boat that I'm on was the first boat, the principal boat was attacked with a drone that deployed an incendiary device that lit up this boat in flames. Luckily, and the crew was on it, luckily they got there in time with a hose to put it out before there was irreparable structural damage. And the very next night, there was another drone attack. We were like mere hundreds of meters from the presidential palace of station. It was crazy. But I say this why? Because in the same 24 hours, the state of Israel bombed Qatar, bombed Yemen, bombed Lebanon, and bombed Syria. 5 countries illegally, unilaterally, and coercively taking military action against these countries with no response. Some light condemnation, some waffling from the Trump administration, of course. I mean, we are really all at risk of the world falling apart, and I have to agree with Richard that it's a great shame. I'm not someone to lecture anyone who's working in a factory and who has such precarious working conditions that have been, over the past 10, 20, 30 years made further precarious by reforms that serve to weaken union density and make everyone feel like they're on their own. But I do think that something is changing, and I do think that now is the moment to be thinking in those terms. Now is the moment to be thinking in those grand, ambitious, and world historic terms about a serious paralysis of economic systems that only serve to profit the corporations that are actively aiding and abetting this genocide. That sounds like kind of lefty speak, but it's so not. Like we all are aware of these two twin dynamics. On the one hand, that our national domestic economies are operating to the massive and glorious benefit of a tiny sector of 1% billionaires. And then the other side, we know very well how aligned those billionaires are with the genocidal agenda that's now being advanced and has for the past 2 years by the state of Israel. Our job is to make the connection between those two things. That's not a theoretical connection, it's an empirical connection, and it's a lethal connection between the systems of accumulation that we see domestically, or I should say systems of exploitation domestically, and systems of annihilation that we see internationally. And so, I don't think it's ever too late to make that connection, and never too late to use Google Translate to try to reach out to the Genovese workers and see what magic can be done across the event.
You're talking about that piece about like the international piece and how it's coming to all of us or whatnot. Like if the destruction of Gaza is allowed to happen, to be completed or whatnot, you're right. Like these are not things this is not technology and billions of dollars that have gone into developing this and perfecting forms of repression that are just going to disappear tomorrow. They will be exported to the rest of us. And I think we're seeing that everywhere, like the attempts at criminalizing even the most peaceful of protest, the most harmless, like, milk toast form expressions of solidarity becoming criminalized, and the levels of violence that people are becoming accustomed to from militarized police in their own countries, etc. And so I think we're seeing how what's happening to the Palestinians slowly begins to build abroad as well. Um, at the same time, I think over the last couple of years, one thing that I've heard frequently, or you see the graffiti or slogans or whatnot, is this idea that Palestine is freeing us all, in the sense that I do think it's creating that awareness of just how connected we are, how what happens there can happen abroad, and how what we choose to do here affects the people of Gaza too. Um, and maybe if you could say a little bit more about that, like the idea that Palestine is sort of, and you hinted at it earlier, like what it means for humanity. Like this is not, obviously, we need to care about the Gazans on their own, the Palestinians on their own, because they deserve human rights, they deserve liberation, they deserve self-determination. But also there's this idea that like of what happens there applies to us more broadly, more directly.
Yeah, I think we're always a bit slow to see this imperial boomerang on its way back home. Um, but it's not an exaggeration to say that Gaza has become basically a playground for a lot of these major tech corporations and defense companies to experiment with forms of repressive technologies that we will see on the streets of every single Western city in the coming years. Specifically, drone technology. I mean, this would take another whole session for us to talk about, but I think people are really, really seriously underestimating how much um, Israel and the little kind of Silicon Valley style hub of technological sort of security technology that they've been trying to incubate in Tel Aviv will affect us all. We know that it affects us all through programs like Pegasus, that invade our privacy. Somehow we've given up that fight to try to claw back any degree of privacy that we have in our lives. Extremely dangerous and extremely geopolitically powerful. Something that's still worth talking about. From a labor perspective, extremely dangerous in terms of labor repression and anti-union efforts. How far those technologies spread, but I mean, these drone technologies that are rapidly sort of that these companies are rapidly innovating and then deploying in Gaza. You know, I don't think people have any idea what this looks like and how much this changes the scope towards civil social um, dissent and mobilization. I think people have a very still today. I find will have a very 20th century idea in their heads about what democracy looks like, and it looks like this kind of dialectic or accordion dynamic where oh, we go out and we ask for more rights, and then maybe there's some repression from the powers that be, but eventually we win them, and to borrow another metaphor, the arc of history bends towards justice. But these new technologies change the game on that. I mean, if they're able to send a quadricopter to your house and assassinate you and get away with it, because there is basically, we're stretching past any possible conception of real serious rule of law, then they're able to nip in the bud these forms of dissent and social mobilization in ways that are totally unprecedented in human history. So I think we need to take more seriously these questions of oppressive technologies. And of course, that's, again, stretching a bit too far than I feel comfortable with in terms of thinking about Gaza. I don't think we should have to think about, we should stop the imperial boomerang as it's whipping through the other parts of the world, long before we have to worry about where it gets to us. But if we have to go there, if we have to deploy that argument to convince people that, we need to fight this very sanguine drift towards bellicosity and militarization that everyone's just accepting, increasing military budgets for NATO purposes and appeasing Trump, and we don't want tariffs. The consequence of that will absolutely be the import of these technologies that have been experimented on, as Anthony Lowenstein has argued in his work on the Palestine as a laboratory, back home. And labor will be the principal target of those repressive technologies, because what's the biggest threat to these dominant powers is, of course, social organization with material power, and the only source of that is not the great posters online. It's workers who are able to shut down their workplaces and tell their bosses that they won't move an inch if their demands are not met.
Thank you. I do have some questions from the audience for you, and one of them was about the drones. And I guess they're wondering, and I mean, obviously, there's been the two drone attacks right when you folks started a few weeks ago in Tunisia. But they're wondering, are the boats being followed? But do you know, I would imagine, but do you have knowledge of the boats being followed by Israeli drones? And what is the sentiment among the participants? Is it something that you discuss? Are people prepared for? How does it affect morale?
Yeah, I'll do those in reverse order. I joined the flotilla, and I got on board in Tunisia. So I was there when the boats arrived to the port of Sidi Bou Said. I was there with Francesca Albanese, barreling down the mountain to the port just after our boat got attacked. That would become my boat. And everyone was freaked out. But what was amazing is the very next morning, we had a general assembly, and it was like, are we sailing on? And not a single person was deterred. Not a single person was deterred. So we have structures in place. I mean, we do drills every day that are either emergency drills or interception drills or getting ourselves ready for what may await us on the other side. And we also have night watches with a whole drone protocol for what happens if we see a device that's heading our way. So every night on every boat, there are people who are watching. We do shifts between everyone on the boat. We're kind of packed in like sardines here. It's a boat built for 10 to 12 people, and we're 31, but so it goes. But we each take shifts at the front, middle, and back to basically make sure that every night we're not being followed, and we think that the risk of violence against the flotilla will start to intensify as we get closer to around Cyprus, which you may know has become kind of a hub for Israeli logistics in the past 2 years. So we're still sailing to Greece now, which is a hostile country, not its people, its government, but not at sort of maybe. I mean, it's all bad. You know, you'll recall that like Netanyahu's plane flew over Athens as they were bombing Iran. So we're in a zone of real complicity in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we expect things to get hotter and hotter. But that just means more and more drills, more and more preparation. At the same time, Pamela, I think it's like really important to emphasize how fucking crazy it is. Sorry for cursing. That we've just accepted that there could be violence against this mission. Like, how have we gotten to a place where boats carrying a bunch of like citizens, like normal, ordinary people, were just like, yeah, they could just bomb us. I mean, we've come so far in terms of normalizing this rogue, illegal, and murderous behavior, and I think that's what terrifies us the most, is how to denormalize that and get people resensitized to the idea that this is unbelievably unacceptable. So, you know, the Israelis have shifted gear in the two earlier missions that succeeded to make it to the zone, to, you know, about 110 miles up from Gaza. They were accusing them of being pleasure cruises and selfie yachts and the like. They've shifted gear and are now accusing us of being terrorists, of being a Hamas flotilla, harboring terror, whatever. I mean, stretching the limits of their propaganda. But as we've all noted, you know, Israeli actions usually follow from Israeli messaging. So it doesn't take, you know, Karl Rove to rethink that what they're doing is setting a stage for a more violent form of interception, detention, torture, if not a repeat of 2010 when there were actual assassinations on board. So we're all trained up in detailed methods of nonviolence: hands up, stay quiet, make way, keep passage. But the communicative side of this is really important. And if you're listening to this, you know, this is a call for you all to not to take your eyes off Gaza, but at the same time to find a way to join a chorus that's growing in kind of defense of not just the flotilla, but humanitarian workers in general, who have been slandered up to the point of their targeted assassination over and over again. We've seen ambulance workers who went to recover, Hindra Job, for example, who were just trying to save the life of a 4 6-year-old girl stuck in a car, surrounded by the dead bodies of her family. You know, it's like we have to defend humanitarian work. from these smears because much more is at stake than just this flotilla. Even though, from a self perspective, I am I'm very grateful for any tweet, any post, any repost, any letter to a parliamentarian that speaks out in defense of this initiative.
Like you, I'm just shocked and appalled at the lack of response from governments. I mean, there's people from, you know, dozens of countries participating, and I would have expected to see, I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have governments would be saying, hey, these are civilians, these are our people, they're on a humanitarian mission. Any harm comes to them, there will be serious consequences. This rogue state cannot continue to get away with it. But like you've said, the response has been mostly one of silence, of downplaying, or of even blaming, playing into what the Israeli government is, their propaganda, which is to frame you folks as some sort of danger or threat, um, to Israel. So that is shocking. Um, I do have another question here. Um, it's what's the likelihood that governments around the world, and in particular the US, would change course towards a just, fair resolution? And I don't know, how optimistic or pessimistic you're feeling about that.
I missed just the last part. We're all talking about the U.S. and the resolution. Sorry, what was it? One more time. Sorry.
No, it was, what's the likelihood that like governments around the world, particularly the US, would change course towards a just and fair solution, or, yeah,
Uh,
I feel,
sorry, like I think we need to take stock of where we are right
yeah.
now. Israeli tanks are entering Gaza City right now. They're executing a final solution for Gaza right now. This is not an exaggeration. While they do this ceremonial nonsense, signing two-state solutions as if they, Canada, UK, Australia, had any right to tell Palestinians how they want to envision their own self-determination. Let's put that aside for a second. Right now, in their own words, they are executing a plan to take Gaza by force and basically kill anyone who stands in their way. Uh, I don't think this is a time for us to be thinking about, like, what does the Liberal Party of Canada think, or what does the Democratic Party? It's like we we are witnessing a Holocaust, and so we need to be thinking in those terms and on that register with that urgency. And so it's it's very frustrating to be going into UN General Assembly high level week this week with the heads of state converging on New York, seeing this giant stretched hand reaching out to pat governments on themselves in the back, taking photo up to the Palestinian Authority, basically saying, "Look, we've done it. What more could you possibly ask for us?" And it's like, well, are we likely to get a Nuremberg trial out of this? Probably not, because we live in a world that's deeply deranged. But if we did, under any reasonable interpretation of international law, at the level of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, we would be seeing serious charges filed for failures to live up to the most fundamental standards of defending life and not supplying genocidaires with material support to continue committing these crimes against humanity. So I just think we need to get on that level, which isn't a scramble level. It's just getting more organized for what this response could look like. And it's obviously not easy, but it has to be done. And I think we will win. I mean, I think we have a precedent in South Africa for when trade unions came together and where international labor flexed its muscle and where we forced a change of regime from one deeply racist and cruel to one that was fundamentally democratic and liberatory. And I think we can do it again. But time is really running out. So I think we need to keep pushing.
I think, everything you've been saying, and seeing how hopeless and pathetic the response of states has been, earlier you were talking about this group of people who shouldn't have to be doing this, but are doing this. And I think in Latin America, we have that expression, solo el pueblo salva al pueblo, right? Only the people can save the people. And I think, I mean, that's what we're seeing is that this international movement is really one of civilians, of people of conscience who have looked to their governments, seen, the most appalling of responses, which is a non-response or actively aiding this genocide. And I think the conclusion, the only one that we can draw is that it falls to us as, regular people living our lives, um, to take on this beast and defeat it. Um, Last question we have. I know you have to get back and you have duties on the boats, all of you, or whatnot. So the last question we have from our audience before we wrap up is, what is the plan for the boats and the humanitarians that do arrive in Gaza?
So yeah, we were gonna reach. Israel is gonna have a tough time. We're 40 boats, right? They can stop one of us, but it's not clear they can stop all 40 boats, maybe 45, maybe up to 50 boats that are sailing to Gaza now. So the plan is, some of the details of that plan are not public to protect people, in particular on the Gaza side, who are, there to receive us, and partly on the flotilla side. So a lot of those plans are not announced ahead of time. But the goal is to reach Gaza, reach the shores, unload the humanitarian aid. But it's not as if we're getting off the boats and getting off into Gaza. We're going to hold the line, hold the corridor open, and use the pressure, use the successful effort of breaking the siege, this unprecedented popular effort to call on states to join the mission. Along the Mediterranean in particular, these European states, I mean, we're being accompanied by this huge boat from Italy, just full, just basically sea rescuers, which is great. But if we succeed to open this corridor, and the rhetoric from Spain and from Italy, from Portugal, from many of these countries who are now signing declarations recognizing the Palestinian state is serious, and what we'll hold that corridor open, and you take your navy and you pack these boats full of the aid that Palestinians desperately needs, and sail through the corridor that we've established. So that's the basic plan, is to use the strength of our numbers to succeed in the mission, and to use the success of that mission to then massively and exponentially accelerate the rate at which critical aid is reaching the starving people of Gaza.
Thank you, David. But also thank you for taking the time, out of the work that you're doing, out of this, I think, tremendous moment of human history that we will all be reading about, that will be studied, that people will be looking back on for generations to come. Um, I think from our organization, Labor for Palestine, um, all the solidarity to you folks and to, all the workers who are participating in the flotilla, the union leaders, the, folks with civil society, with NGOs, doctors, everybody who has just really decided to take this on and say, we can't stand idly by while this happens. Um, we'll obviously be following, your mission very, very closely, and hope to hear back and know what's happening, and also, mobilizing our people to participate here and do the work that's needed, globally, on the part of workers to stop this.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I'll leave you all with this beautiful sunset behind me, which is the small perks of a very long, difficult journey,
I
or
can imagine.
some nice sunsets. But you can see, I mean, sometimes it's a very beautiful thing, because we're traveling now as a fleet, and just on the horizon here, you can see, like, if you could see more closely, you could see all of these boats traveling together, and it's something really beautiful. I have to admit, I'm very moved every day by the sight of so many people who've come together, speaking. I mean, on our ship, we're speaking 7 languages at a time. But getting along and brought together by this shared moral conviction and sense of duty. And I know that so many people on this call share that sense of duty, and it so doesn't matter whether you're on this boat or off this boat. Like we just have to switch on to the calling of this moment because our kids and our grandkids will ask us what we did. That's how I feel, at least, that they'll ask us what we did in October 2020 or September 2025, and we want to give them an answer that makes us proud.
Well, all our greetings and solidarity to all the comrades on the flotilla. And like I said, we'll be following and trying to do our part here.
You can give a little, you can see we're just crowded in. Yeah, I'm going to turn my camera around and give you a sense of the boat lights here. Everyone's kind of doing their thing. Anyway, take care. Thanks so much, Pamela. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, David. Take
Take
care.
care.